right, welcome to another episode of Mental Health Mondays. I'm super stoked today because my guest is not only a veteran of all things ski related, she is a Colorado guru. If you ever find yourself in Colorado, you need to seek her out. But more importantly, she is my cousin, Michelle Siemer. Michelle, welcome to the show. Thanks for doing this.
No problem. I'm super excited to sit down and have this conversation today.
Absolutely. And I'm super excited because although, as many of you know from the show, my stepfather Alan passed away, great man, talked a lot about him. But through this loss, I actually connected with a side of my family I hadn't really talked to much and at all. I found a cousin Michelle.
Yep, here I am in Colorado.
Well, Michelle, I appreciate you joining me. I do want to talk in general. There is kind of a thing. Usually with the Mental Health Mondays, we kind of let the conversation go, and I'm sure we will. But I feel like there's a real that we could really focus on a specific kind of issue related to gender in the workplace, specifically gender pay gaps, and specifically going on with your case. And I just you sent me a lot of information, and I've been talking to you about it, and I'm fascinated. I'm a bit baffled that this is 2023 and we're still kind of wrestling with some of this stuff. And I wanted to kind of hear your side. And if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about you've been working at as a Beaver Creek Resorts. You're basically the operations manager. You're basically the one running it. And here you had people under you that you were training making more money than you. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, not only was I not earning as much as my male peers, but I had several guys below me who, I did payroll. I didn't see individual paychecks, but doing payroll one day, I was like, wait a minute, this is what this person is making. And
yeah,
did a little bit of math. And I was like, wait a minute. And, it was something that I brought to my superior's attention, and it just kept getting dismissed, or that's not really important, or brushed under the rug for now. And I had issues in the past, and where I felt my position was not what it should have been. And I went to HR. This is pre-COVID. I went to HR, and the email that I gave to HR was handed back to my same director. And that came back to me with, what are you doing? They're going to think you're trying to say something. And I was like, hello, I am trying to say something. And I was basically warned, don't rock the boat. You don't want to get yourself in trouble for, making waves kind of thing. And at that point, I pursued other departments. I was like, let me learn something else. Let me find a way to make myself more promotable, to transfer to different departments if I'm not being treated for my worth under this specific manager. And I actually hosted our local Good Morning Vale TV show. I started off working for them part-time, and I was like, this is great. I would go to work at 6:30 a.m., do the Good Morning Vale, and that ended at 9 o'clock. And then I would go to my other job from 9 to 5. And that was great. And then COVID happened, and our studio closed down. It did not reopen for almost a year post-COVID. And at some point in that year, the same director that I had came to me and said, why don't you just take over all my departments? And at that point, I was happy to be working post-COVID.
Yeah.
I was happy that you wanted me to come back to work. And in the position that I was coming back to, I knew that pathways would still need to be plowed. Recycling would still need to happen. There were a lot of moving parts that I knew I wouldn't have to worry about. And I was like, yes, let me come back. And whenever I came back, he had taken something that had taken 2+ managers, rolled it all into one and said, here you go, and didn't change the position of it, the grade of it, gave me about a $10,000 raise. But when you break it
Yeah.
down to what that should have been and what some of the other males within village operations were getting and their titles for the roles they had, it wasn't the same. And like you said, this is 2023, right?
Yeah.
Although this is probably like 2021, 2020,
Yeah.
but I just thought, okay, a lot of the things that I'm doing are traditionally male oriented positions. I'm dealing with heavy equipment. I'm dealing with the recycling, the composting, the trash that's coming out of, this is a unincorporated town basically. So I'm dealing with all these functions kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Because
And I'm thinking,
nature
okay,
didn't lock down,
yeah. And I just assumed I just have to prove myself. I just have to show them that this is not a problem, that I can do this job.
Mhm.
And I kept getting, here's a hoop, jump through this hoop. And some of the hoops were ones that they didn't think I would jump through. For example, you're dealing with a lot of homeowners associations and different things. And they were like, well, get more experience in homeowners associations. Okay. I'm also the president of my homeowners association.
Yeah.
But beyond that,
Yeah. That's a
they,
little asterisk.
yeah. So beyond that, for property management, you can get some certifications.
Mhm.
And they asked me to do that on probably like a Monday or Tuesday, the beginning, middle of the week. And I came back the following Monday and I said, I took the class online over the weekend and I'm taking the test tomorrow. And I got something like a 97% on it. And they were like, well, how could you do that fast? And I'm like, doesn't matter how fast I did it. Here's the certificate. I passed. I'm done.
They're like, what do we do now?
Yes. And it was a lot of that. And, once I realized that, and this is before I even realized that someone below me was making more money.
Mhm.
And it's one thing if we're doing different jobs, but we were doing the same job and I was doing a lot more on top of it. And I was also doing a lot more that the other male management within village operations were not being asked to do as well.
Do you think that they asked you, or the guy that asked you, hey, why don't you come back and do all my departments? Do you think that he felt like you would do those jobs with just a $10,000 raise? Do you think that he was like, all right, we could save some money? Was it, well, let me rephrase it. Do you think it was that he was desperate and they needed some help? Or do you think it was more like, hey, we could save money if we get Michelle to do all these things. We only have to pay her $10,000 more.
I think there were several pieces.
Mhm.
One, I had been there for 20 plus years. So as far as knowing the way things operated, there was no training. I knew how everything operated. And another piece was I am really hardworking. Like I do jump through those hoops. So as far as everything that I had run before taking on these other departments, it ran smoothly. There were no issues. And I saw it as finally you're gonna give me an opportunity. You're gonna give me this pathway to grow, kind of thing. And
At this point, you essentially have earned it. I mean, they went to you. It sounds like they went to you because they knew you could, or he went to you because he knew you could do it.
they did, but this is interesting too. I have 3 kids. I have never, I'm the sort of person that I worked up until, okay, the doctor says I have to go in tomorrow and have the baby.
Yeah.
So I got to take tomorrow off.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally worked up until the day I had my kids. And then I came back to work as soon as, I was able to come back to work. And it wasn't until I sort of aged out that he was like, well, she's not going to have any more kids. Maybe we can give her some more responsibility now. And, I don't know. I feel like with my specific situation, I feel like the person that I worked for, a lot of other people had called him a misogynist. A lot of other people had said, this is he's a really hard person to work for, and he was. And several problems that I had with him, he had a really volatile temper. He had a history of grabbing employees by the neck and shaking them and saying, "What were you thinking?" And the crazy part is, a different employee went to our superior about this and said, "Hey, this person is doing this." And to give you some perspective, he's a former professional baseball player. So he was about 6'2", 6'3", upwards of 200 pounds, but like a big guy, And so there was definitely a major intimidation factor just with him being angry, never mind grabbing you around the neck kind of thing. So this other person went to our superior, who happened to be a former NFL player. And so anyway, the NFL player, the senior director, he came to me and asked me if this had happened. And I backed it up and I said, yeah, this person does this all the time. And they asked me, what do you do? And I go, I get my job done. So that doesn't happen.
Right.
Yes, it has happened to me and I've seen him do it to other people, but I make sure that my stuff is tight and right. So I fly under the radar with anything. And I thought, this is awesome. I didn't have to be the one to make the waves. HR was going to talk to me next. And that interview never came.
No HR. What?
No, the senior director basically slapped his hand and said, "Jerry, stop touching the employees." And then COVID happened and we lost HR. HR became like, you did all your onboarding as the hiring manager. You create a case in the computer if you have a problem with something. And so in my situation, I had been to HR and the information that I gave to HR was handed back to the same person that I was basically complaining about. I had another person who complained about this same director to his superior, and he got a slap on the wrist for it. So at that point, that's when I started taking the job at the TV station, because I was like, okay, this gives me a way out that I can, I can learn this. I can pick up more and more hours and eventually go full time doing that. So, because one of the big questions I get is, why did you stay for so long? Why did you take it? And I had 3 kids. Kids, and I live in an area that is one of the most expensive areas in the country as far as the disparity between the people who own 4th and 5th houses here and the people who work here. A condo in this area, 2-bedroom condo, 1 bathroom, built in the 1980s, sells for somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000. So to pay rent here is ridiculous. And to raise 3 kids, you can't just leave and not have a paycheck. And so I kept trying to make that plan. And I kept thinking, if I just work harder. And so when I came back after COVID and took on that new role, I was like, give it to me. What else do you need me to do? Give it to me.
Bring it on. What do you got?
Let me show you that I can do all of it. And I was in disbelief that it could really be something else. Like, maybe he just doesn't think a girl's going to do as good of a job. I just have to show him that I'm going to do a really good job,
I think it's interesting because I think this happens in a lot of workplaces, definitely education. On my educators podcast, I was having this very same conversation about how a lot of times people that like teachers will stay in a very toxic, terrible position that's killing them, but they staying because they care about the kids, or they staying because you don't factor in the fear of leaving a career, let alone a job. I mean, when people say, why did you stay for so long? Well, you had stayed for so long. You were trying to, this was your life. This was your income. And, it's such a scary thing to say, all right, well, I'm just going to leave. Well,
Yeah.
Where?
And even if you ask anyone who's in abusive relationship,
Yes.
you have to make a plan. You
Mhm.
just can't walk out that door, because where are you going to go? You have to make up a plan and you have to execute it. And I had my plan and it fell apart. And so I came back and I was like, okay, you're finally getting this opportunity. And, I kept believing them. I kept
Yeah.
believing them when they were like, Michelle, we're trying to fix it, or Michelle, we're going to do this or that. And, I gave you that recording.
Mhm.
I came to the realization, finally, this is happening, and it's not going to get fixed unless I'm willing to do something about it. And, I had already researched, what do I need to go to the EEOC? And these cases are extremely hard to prove.
Mhm.
And so I Googled it and I was like, okay, well, in the state of Colorado, it's perfectly legal to have a one-person consent for a recording, meaning if you're a part of that conversation, you can record it. So I recorded a conversation with my director and his superior, and this was months after bringing this to the company's attention about having this fixed, and it just wasn't happening. And so I knew if I had that, I could report it. And I recorded that conversation, sent my resume to as many different places as I could, and found myself other employment. Waited 90 days to make sure that, it was going to be a good fit. Nothing was going to happen. And at that point, then I sent my recording off to the EEOC along with everything else to file a charge.
Nice. And we have a copy of that audio. I just want to, if you don't mind me playing it, and you kind of we'll pause to get some commentary.
Sure.
And I like this because it's an example of these kind of explanations when somebody finally does kind of bring up an issue. I think a lot of us have heard this kind of talk before, and I think I joked with you on text that if you got $1 for every time this guy said I'm not bullshitting you, you would have had enough money to retire. I mean,
I know, right?
So and like, because I've heard this too, a lot of people where they do the closed door, and there's that I dare say feigned sympathy, if you will, but and I wanted to ask you too. They talk about something called compression. What is compression, or what was compression?
Sure. Well, one of the things that had happened was they changed their minimum wage.
Okay.
And so everyone who was starting out as an employee, and this is the ski industry, right? So we have a fresh crop of employees every single year. Some of them stay, some of them don't, whatever. But so what they did was they said, okay, we're going to raise our new minimum wage for everyone coming in. So if you are someone who works on the ski hill and you're making $15 an hour, and they say the new minimum wage is going to be $15 an hour, we got to fix you, right? Because you can't be an employee who's been there for 5 years making the same amount as someone who's coming in on their first day. So compression was, how do we adjust the wage ranges to take care of people? Okay. And one of the things we were talking about that was brought up in that meeting is my situation was happening before the wage change. Yeah. Because once the senior director had sort of started saying, well, no, there's issues where people who are on salary and the compression, because they didn't adjust the salary. And my answer to them was, but this was happening to me before you even changed the wages.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. And it just seemed like they're maybe using compression as, oh, this is a good way to kind of explain it or something. So one thing first I want to compliment you on is there's several points in the conversation where it sounded like he was doing this kind of vague, like, oh, we sympathize, but this is nothing we can do. And he was basically saying, like, I can't do anything, or we can't do anything. We're going to wait and see. And it seemed like he was trying to kind of end the conversation. And then you would be like, all right, so what's next? What's now? Okay, well, let's talk about my situation. And like, you need to be relentless with that kind of thing. It was almost like he was several times he's trying to brush you off. Obviously, you're going to hear how many times he says, I'm not bullshitting you, or this sounds shitty. And you're like, yeah, it does. Did you feel it was genuine, or was your red flags going up that this is clearly a brush off?
Well, again, this is not my first conversation in this situation, because this is about probably my fifth or sixth one.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was the same meeting over and over and nothing was happening. So I was like, okay, I'm going to record it. And for this specific one, it was terrifying because I had my phone in my pocket and I had downloaded a recording app, and I'm wondering, is this clear? Is this going to fall out of my pocket and I'm going to get fired?
Is he going to go, are you wearing a wire?
Yeah.
Are you wearing a wire?
Yeah.
You rat.
So going into this was terrifying, and I wanted to be clear, and I didn't want to, I didn't really want to sound like I was yelling at them or anything like that, but I wanted to be direct and specific as to why aren't we fixing this? And, the part that floored me is, I would hire people, I would fire people. I had a staff of between 50 and 70, depending upon the time of year. And if someone on one of my teams had come to me and said, hey, why am I making less than him? We've been here for the same amount of time. We both have the same certifications. What's going on? And I would have said, oh my gosh, this is such an oversight. Let me fix it immediately.
Yes. Yes.
And so I had the ability to do that. And there is no way that someone above me did not have the ability to do that. So I don't know if it was an issue of I am, unfamiliar with technology because there's not an HR and I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to make the magic happen in the computer, or I am unwilling, or I don't know what the problem was. But for me, that was my perspective going into all this. Oh, I just have to let them know this is happening. They'll fix it.
Right. Yeah. You would want that to be the way to do it. It should be the way it does.
I didn't even have any doubt that it would be any way else. And I don't think the corporation that I work for or worked for is evil or has bad policies. But I think they had a lot of faults when it came to some of their management. Yeah. And he was someone who had spent his entire career with that company. He was never really promoted out of the position that he was in. And if you're looking at someone who's been there for, 30 plus years and they haven't grown with that company, why is that? And you've never had a single person promoted from below you. Why is that? And
you factor in the allegations allegedly of him grabbing employees and being a bully kind of thing. I mean, it starts to paint a picture.
So I think there was some negligence on the company's part as far as keeping someone like this in the position that they were in. And, I don't even necessarily think they would have had to have fired him. I think early on, they should have coached him. Yeah. They should have made him a better manager, and, I really don't want to put labels on generations or anything like that, but he was a little bit older than me, and he definitely had a mentality of I'm going to have people do what I'm asked them by fear or intimidation,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is not a good management style.
Mm-mm.
Like you need to inspire people to want to do a good job. And no one goes to work and says, I want to do a shitty job today.
Right. That blows my
You,
mind.
you have to learn to bring out the best in
Yeah.
people. And that was definitely not his style of management, and the company should have caught it a long time ago, and they should have fixed it.
Yeah, your HR department should have. Oh wait, you didn't have one.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me that still blows my mind. How can you not have even like a someone designated as HR, like just
Mhm.
somebody for people to go to? That blows my mind itself. That wow,
So
that's crazy.
if you had a problem, you would basically enter it into the computer, and you would get something called an HRC number, which was your HR case number. And then they would correspond to you back and forth through the computer. Um,
That
periodically,
that's personal. I mean
yeah,
that's very
periodically,
warm.
maybe there was a phone call, but for the most part, you did it through the computer. And there were a lot of problems with it. I live in a very heavy Latino area. A lot of them are the housekeepers in the hotels and,
Hmm.
different, positions. And I had one of my team members, he had had a heart attack. And it wasn't like you could press two for the Spanish.
Espanol, yeah.
Yeah. So it was it had a lot of problems. And
Mhm.
I also don't think that my director knew how to navigate it very well.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds. I mean, we're not sitting here ready to bash this guy, but it sounds like it was a managerial problem. This was something that should have been coached, like you said. It's a shame. Like, were you ever given evaluations, like yearly evaluations or anything like that?
Every single year.
And
Every single year. And it was like, you're doing a great job. Sorry, we can't pay you or promote you, but you're doing a great job.
yeah, keep
Um,
keep up the great work at the same pay that we're giving. Yeah.
not even not even my director. I received awards from the company, from the CEO, and the different like as high as you could be within our resort, for like employee of the year kind of stuff, 3 times. So it's not like my performance was part of the issue.
Yeah, you'd think that this baseball guy would know. I mean, in baseball, it's like contracts, and you get they're always Canseco's going to get more than Slummy McGee based on performance. At least that's what I understand. I, it blows my mind that again that like businesses don't quite think like that, where it's like, okay, this person's performing, let's pay them to keep them around. I mean, it's not like it's the only ski resort in Colorado, right? I mean, there's other companies.
Right. And I don't, maybe another problem corporate wise is, once you were there and you were working and I hired you and you were doing a great job. And if I hire you and I don't know you, I'm going to hire you at the bottom of that pay range.
Mhm.
But say you're there for 6 months and you're a rock star. You are crushing it every day, and you show up every day, and you're
Mhm.
carrying the load of 2 people. And you say, hey, Michelle, I know you started me low because you weren't sure what you were going to get. I made the new minimum wage. What's the chances you could give me an increase on that?
Yeah.
Um, it was, they did not like to do that, but you could do it. And me as their manager, I knew I could do it as long as I was staying within the pay range for that position. Like I couldn't pay
Mhm.
you, outside the range so much, but I the company wanted to say, oh, well, annual merit increases are in October. I'm going to lose you if I can't give this to you,
Right.
So there were ways around that. And I don't know if, maybe he didn't feel empowered to fix things,
Mhm.
or if he didn't know how,
It could be. I mean,
or he
listening to
just
the
didn't want to, you know?
it could be that. Like, it does sound like he was in over his head a little bit. Like in that conversation, there was like that whole I'm not bullshitting you, or this is there were a lot of times where he sounded like well, he basically was telling you this isn't going to happen right away, or isn't going to happen at all, really. But it sounded like he didn't know what to do. He couldn't say, "Hey, let me try this." But again, that could have also just been, blowing smoke. He could have just been like, you don't really know. But
You
the
don't
fact
know
of the
what you
matter,
don't know.
yeah. But the fact of the matter is it's like, what I don't understand is like you were able. Well, let me rephrase it. Let me ask you this question: do you feel like that it's an issue paying people what they're worth because maybe the top heavy part of the company, and I see this a lot of companies, they're trying so hard to make a profit on their end that they almost micromanage. They almost are very, very reluctant to pay employees what they're worth. Because I mean, there's a number of unions. Like, I don't know if you've been following the Amazon issues and Starbucks and a lot of these unions that they're it's almost like these companies are trying really, really hard to minimize how much they're paying at the bottom to maximize their profits at the top. How much of that you think is involved, or is this more specifically a different issue?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think as a corporation, they're known for paying their employees poorly. I think they've been trying to make changes in that, but they didn't do it in a very smart way. Like, for example, one of the things that Vail Resorts will now say is they do $20 as their new minimum wage, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Vail Resorts is a huge corporation. But if you are making $20 an hour at one of our resorts in Ohio, you're living large.
Yeah.
If you are making $20 an hour in Colorado, in Vail, you're going to have a hard time living out here. You're going to have
Yeah.
another job or two other jobs. I don't understand why they didn't sort of look at the locations. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's awesome that they did that, but I think it maybe should have been a little bit more, hey, let's do raise the minimum wage by 20% at all locations instead of a flat number.
Yeah, because
And
cost of living is a factor. I
it
mean,
is.
yeah.
And they've done a lot at the bottom and said, okay, well, the new minimum wage is, $20 an hour. So male, female, whatever your nationality, whatever your gender, whatever you identify as, this is what you're getting, which is awesome. Everyone starts out on the same level. And I think at the very top of the organization, they're really putting an effort in to really do promote, females in leadership. But it's that middle piece. And if they're not sort of going through that middle area and looking at, why is this person still here after 30 years and we're not having any growth, and we're not having any growth below them, and their turnover for directly below them is really high. What's going on? What's wrong with this piece? And I think because it is so large, they're not looking at those individual pieces, and the lack of an HR is definitely not assisting with that.
Not at all. Not at all. I used to work for an administrator in elementary school, and she had such a high turnover and so many complaints, and and to the point where they brought in a retired principal to mentor her, and the mentor, not only did the mentor look at her caseload as she's on the spectrum, like this is somebody that she's brilliant when it comes to numbers, but she's lacking that. She lacked that personal comprehension of other people's feelings. So, but to put someone like that in a leadership position, it's not. I mean, she gets the brunt of the hate because it's like she would say things that would tick people off. But it's more on the Department of Education for keeping somebody who's terrible at what you vitally need in leadership. She's a terrible leader, but her skills would be so much better in a position where she's looking at numbers, she's looking at things over here. So at some point, like, having a terrible leader, at what point does it become less about them being a terrible leader and they should be better, where the company should be like, all right, we need to make a move here?
And in my company's defense, there was an awful. So each resort will have a, this is our VP of this resort kind of thing. And I feel like at our specific resort, there was a decent amount of turnover in that position. And then in the senior director of village operations below that, there was a decent amount of turnover as well. And I think that because of that, it's one of the reasons my director stayed in his position for so long, because someone new would come in and say, stop doing that, and he would stop for a little bit. And then, that person above him would leave or get promoted out, and a new person would come in and they would go, what are you doing? Stop doing that. And, it kept allowing it to happen,
Yeah. Just, hey, stop doing that. Oh, see you later. Stop doing it like this. This like this IKEA conveyor belt of people going, hey, stop being so toxic. All right, bye.
Right. But if you're not, if there wasn't any documentation on it, there was nothing to show that this was a history of it.
Yeah. That the parallels to this, and like in education, where we have a student that has special needs, that is violent and maybe and has these issues, and teachers will have these anecdotal notes. We'll take all these notes and we'll have all this stuff, but then they go to the next grade and the administration goes, well, let's see how they do next year. And then it's like everything all those notes that you took, it's like out the window. And then before you know it, they get to high school, and this poor kid hasn't had any of this, all of the supports that you've recommended, that you've tried, they go out the window. And it's almost like it's like either they're afraid to address it. They don't want to be the one to be the one to say, hey, this kid needs to be in this, needs to receive these special accommodations or something.
I'm actually on page with you for this, because my daughter actually has dyslexia. And I'm always totally shocked from year to year, that her teachers have no clue, and I feel like I have the same conversation every single year. And, like, for example, in her music class last year, she had been getting in trouble for talking and, talking to the little girl beside her. And it was because she doesn't read the music. She plays it by ear. So she'd have the girl beside her play it, and then she'd
go, oh, okay.
And as soon as I talked to the teacher and the teacher realized this, she was like, oh, well, this all makes sense. And I'm like, but this is in her plan. This is in her plan with the school. Why don't you know this?
In the teacher's defense, again, it could be, I don't know the specific situation, but from a teacher's side, a lot of times it's like the teacher, like I would have a kid, and all year long I'm doing interventions, and even with students with IEPs, I would do the interventions. I would have the data, and I'd say, hey, for example, I had a student that came to me that was gifted, but also dyslexic, but nobody addressed the dyslexia. He came up, it's up to third grade, and third grade's that year where they're no longer learning to read. They're starting to read to learn. They've kind of gotten the reading, but he was still struggling with reading. But he was so smart. He was able to outwit tests to still score pretty decently, because he would figure out the test even though he couldn't really read it as well. And so after collecting data and going through a lot of different tests, I bring it to my administration, and his mom and I are sitting there and we're talking. And before his mom came in, one of the staffers leans over to me and is like, well, this kid's on grade level. Why are we meeting about him? And I'm like, because he spells cat ACT. Yeah. Because he to me, it blew my mind, because it was like, I don't, it doesn't matter that if he's really gifted and he's able to overcome, he is how further can he go if he can get the accommodations for his dyslexia? It's like we're judging him by a standard. We should be judging him by his own personal growth. And to me, that's the fundamental thing that needs to change in education. There are a lot of people pushing for this, but what needs to change is you should have a standard, like a target for people to look at, but student growth is so much more important. And what, because if you compare kids to each other, you're always going to find deficiencies. You're always going to find these problems. But if you compare every student to where they were yesterday, where they were last year, that's what's important. I feel like a kid that goes from not being able to read to actually being able to at least read Jack and Jill, that's a victory, because they've grown. That's progress. But what happens when you have this standard, the kids at the top get bored because they're not being challenged. The kids down below feel like they're dumb because they don't see the growth that they're making. They only see how far from the standard they are. And then the kids here get ignored because they're making the standard, and I think that's what I'm sorry to get on my soapbox about that, but it drives me nuts, because there's it seems it's very similar to where a lot of teachers, we say the same things, but there's so many teachers, it's the prisoner's dilemma. A lot of teachers don't want to be the one to really speak up, because then they're the one that's going to get made an example and fired, or they're going to be the one that suddenly gets they get the largest class for the next 3 years. They get 30 kids instead of 20, and they get a lot of there's backlash when you make waves, and it's, I don't know. I try to get off on that, but what is it about? What does it seem like there is a feeling of fear of making waves in when you're working, and why is it so hard for people to speak up?
Well, I think it's the fear of loss of income. I mean, so where I am, like I said, we've got a very large Latino population. You're not going to get a job with my corporation unless you have your background papers to back it up.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that everyone who's living in your household has everything they need to legally be here. So a lot of my housekeepers, they don't want to make waves because they don't want someone coming to their house and questioning, is your brother legal, or, they don't want that. The paycheck is, it's not an area where you can survive out here. For the average working person, you're basically either a second or third homeowner. And I mean, the ski houses here sell for 30 million. So that's not your primary home. That's your, to then have to live here on, $20 an hour, you can't afford to make a lot of waves, because there's not a lot of places to go. I mean, for me here, I live in a rural area. It's a mountain town. It's a ski town. So you work for the ski hill. And if you lose that ski hill, you really don't have that many great options. I mean, you're easily going to find yourself another job. You can go get a job in a restaurant. You can go get a job, whatever. But you're not necessarily going to have health insurance. You're not necessarily going to have all the other things that sort of come with working for a corporation.
Yeah, I think it kind of circling back to something we touched on earlier, it's not as cut and dry of, well, why don't you leave? Or why don't you, why don't you quit? Because it may not be the income you should be paid, but it's consistent and it's right now.
There was no way I could take a cut in my wages, even if we're talking about $1,000 or $2,000. I could not afford a loss in my wages to be able to live here with my kids. And if I have to tolerate something that is uncomfortable or You can have a bad day from, so I know that my kids have cleats to go play football, or so I know that, they've had a good dinner. I'm more than willing
Yeah.
to have that sacrifice for my kids. I think anyone who has kids would basically think the same way. Um, for me, and I think for most women, that's the main reason
Mhm.
that we don't make waves. We want to make sure that we can carry a lot. And for me, my family was my priority. And as I took on more and more, I found myself working. Um, I would wake up at 4:45 to go to work. I would be at work by 6 a.m. And a lot of nights I wouldn't get home till 9 p.m.
Ooh.
And then on my days off, I was getting calls about, hey, at that $30 million home, the sprinkler's blowing onto I don't know, the side of the house.
Yeah.
Can you
So
come in? Whatever. And so I was like, well, I'm working all of these hours for my family, but now I don't get to see my kids before school, and I don't even get to see them
they're
after
already in bed.
school because they're already in bed. And it was, if this is my priority, how I'm not living that value.
Yeah.
And I was also really angry, and I was probably angry because I was so tired. And I would come home, and there would be, I don't know, just dishes in the sink, or the dogs weren't walked, or whatever, and I would bark at anyone. And I was like, this is not healthy. And
Mm-mm.
for me, I'll keep going, and going and going, and I don't complain. But I have eczema, and all of a sudden I'll break out in hives from the stress.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself getting snappy at my kids. And my husband was like, I think when you come home from work, you should just walk the dog. Just go for a walk with the dog.
Yeah. Just
And I
go.
was
Yeah.
like, okay. And that did help a little bit. But it was at that point that I was like, I need to get out of this situation,
Yeah.
because now it's affecting my health, it's affecting my family. And, if the value that I have is my family, so I can spend time with my family, I'm not getting that.
Yeah. Before you know it, you're gonna come home and they're all getting
They're
ready to go
gone.
to college. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that, yeah, that there's and work-life balance. I mean, and it does come to that whole thing too. It's like you're doing it for your family, but you're not getting to see your family,
Yeah.
and that's such a terrible thing. You mentioned too that it's like a lot more of that mentality tends to be, or you mentioned that it, or alluded to that it's typical of female employees to think that way about their family. Do you think that how do you think gender plays a role, or has played a role in the pay gap between you and your coworkers?
Absolutely. And I don't think, okay, I think I had an unfortunate situation, right? I don't
Hmm.
think that's everyone's situation, but the pay gap is still there. So I think there's several reasons for that. One, there's more single parent or single moms than there
Hmm.
ever has been, right? Um, and so if I'm working and I start at the same time as the dad beside me, and he has kids too, and those kids are sick. Who's more likely to stay home with the kids because they're sick? Is it mom or is it dad? More than likely, it's mom who's going to stay home, and that's okay, And then who's going to have to take time off to have the kid? Well, that's going to be mom
Yeah.
too, right? And all of a sudden, when someone above them is looking to promote one of them, even though their tenure is equal, they're going to look at that dad and say, well, you know what? She's taken a lot of time off, but he's always here. So let's promote him because we know that he's going to be here to get the job done. And I don't think that necessarily people even see that they're doing it. Do you know,
Mhm.
I think it just and I don't think people necessarily specifically are trying to create that gap.
Yeah, they're
I
not
just
conscious
think
of it.
yeah, exactly. It's like an unconscious bias that starts to show up. And I think even in households where there's still two people and they're not a single mom, I do think that a lot of the burden of the household, and this is now changing, but still a lot of the burden of the household still falls on the mom. So you go to work and you're still most likely doing the laundry, you're cooking dinner, you're doing all these other little day-to-day things. And I think as we continue to grow as society, we're seeing less of that because now most people can't afford for one parent to stay home.
Yeah.
And, if you're going to have a marriage that actually works and both parents are in the household, you're going to have to work on dividing that a little bit better if you're going to be successful.
Do you think do you feel like a lot of the gender roles in a household, how much of that is biologically intrinsic and how much of it is where we've been in society for forever? How much of that, yeah, is a
I
product
think
of
a lot of
society?
it is where we've been in society. I mean, even with what you're talking about with a teacher,
Hmm.
let's just think about it this way, right? You're a little kid, and because you got a computer, every little kid does now, and
Hmm.
you Google teacher, right?
Yes.
The image that you see is most likely not going to be a man. The
Mm.
image that comes up when you Google teacher is most likely going to be a woman. And it's
Yes.
most likely going to be a woman for nurses, teachers, secretaries, different occupations. But if you Google like goat for an athlete, you're much less likely to get Simone Biles versus Tom Brady.
Yeah.
If you Google judge or doctor,
Well,
and just
Judge, you're going to get Judge Judy. Let's be honest.
well,
But other than that,
okay.
yeah.
But we're starting to see that shift.
Hmm.
But even today in society, and this goes not just for gender, but for, color, ethnicity, race,
Culture. Yeah.
everything. If you can't see it, how can you be it? If you
Mhm.
can't see male teachers in the classroom as a little kid, or even when you Google it, or
Mhm.
in books, how would you ever get the idea that that would be okay for you to grow up and be that? So
I
I
do.
think
Yeah.
I
Well, I
think we're
do.
just getting to a point where we're reaching that. And I also think, as far as um, nature versus nurture, I think as a little girl, you're taught to sit still, be quiet, smile, look pretty. You're going to get your dress ruined. Don't play in that. You can't get dirty. You have to look nice, or
Mhm.
whatever. And I think there's a little bit of just, oh, boys are boys. And that's starting to change too. But for people my age, whenever I speak up and raise my hand and say, hey, this needs to change, this is not right, and you're assertive and direct, you're a bitch.
Mm.
And I think whenever you're a guy and you step up and you say, hey, this is wrong, we need to fix this, you're a leader. And so there's a little bit of the narrative that's still changing with that.
Exactly. But I kind of talking about teachers in the workplace. We talked offline before. You're right. When you Google teacher, in fact, a lot of times I'll look at lesson plans, or I'll look at, teacher pay teachers, or I'll look at something online, and the picture of the teacher is typically, it's a female teacher, especially elementary school. You see,
Hmm.
like, oh, it's always this female teacher. And I've had situations, not to toot my own horn, but most people that know me, I was a very effective teacher, behavior manager in the classroom. The kids loved coming to Mr. Burden's class, but it was a number of factors. It was one that we built a community. I listened to the kids. I tweaked lessons so that it was entertaining for them. Partly because I think I'm still half 8 years old, anyways, mentally. but like we talk Minecraft, we talk a lot of the stuff that kids are into. And whenever in the discipline aspect, the behavior management aspect, it was a growth mentality. There was reinforcement where if a kid messed up, there was always that opportunity to earn the day back or to come back around. There was always that none of the kids felt like singled out. They were part of a community. And then I would be told by my peers a lot of times, well, those kids respond to you because you're a male teacher. And it bothers me. And I couldn't put my finger on it for a while. And again, I'm still open to other people's takes on it, but I always felt like two things. One, saying they respond to you better because you're a male teacher, it dismisses my skills. Like the stuff that, like, the reason why I'm a good teacher, I don't think has to do with my gender, especially because I've seen some male teachers that were terrible at that. They were terrible at getting the kids excited. On the flip side, my favorite teachers in my past, out of 5 of them, only one of them was a male teacher. My favorite teacher of all time was Mrs. Owens, and she was very much like me. And that was one of the things. And I think that when you say, well, it's because you're a male teacher, it's also implying that a female teacher can't be as effective at what I was doing. And I know teachers that I've worked with, and like I said, Mrs. Owens, that were rock stars. I feel like that's an example, and it could be an evolution of where we're coming from. Maybe I don't know if we need to be patient, or if it's like, or maybe just tempered with a little understanding, but we need to move forward. But it was like in the 1950s and 60s, it's like, the teacher position was mostly, if not all, female.
You could be a professor, but you couldn't be a teacher.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, it's kind of like, and it sounds silly that it's like, I don't want to call it reverse sexism, but I've always felt like, why you got to bring up gender? If we can get to a point, and I think this goes with race, culture, and everything, where it's merit-based only. Like, and I know it's hard, and that's such an easy pie in the sky thing to say, because there are so many factors. But it seems like if I was a business, it seems so antiquated to focus on things that really aren't, like forget about the gender. If you are able to do this job and do it well, and you have the experience, why shouldn't I pay you what you're worth? Because I want you to be on my team. I don't want you going anywhere. I want you to be on my team, versus paying somebody else the same more who's doing less. To me, that's bad business.
I totally agree.
I mean, I'm preaching to the choir. Sorry to get on my soapbox, but just that stuff blows my mind. And how about take some of that money and create an HR department? I mean, you're saving money somewhere.
I really think, I had even suggested, because, on the same online things, you could suggest stuff. And I had suggested, we've got used to have 4 resorts fairly close to each other in Colorado: Beaver Creek, Vail, Keystone, and Breckenridge. And my thought was, why not even just have one HR person who spends a day at each of those resorts, and you make an appointment, and it's not for hiring and onboarding, but it's for the people who are going to go on short-term disability. It's for the people who are getting ready to retire. It's for the bigger things. Like, as a manager, I don't have any problem doing your reviews, hiring you, doing your I-9s. But when you start asking me about how do I go about getting my money out of my 401k, I'm like, oh.
that needs to go to HR. You also got another cousin, my wife, Deb, who I can't wait for you guys to meet. I think you guys are kindred spirits. She, because I rescued her from Chicago and brought her to Virginia Beach, but you can't get the Chicago out of the girl. And she's up there right now with her sister, and she's eating deep dish pizza and White Castles, and she's having a day. But she works payroll for her company. And there's a culture thing, because the owners of the company are very old school, like Indian old school culture, and there is a bit of that. They do kind of treat. They're very slick about it, but they do kind of treat the women a little different. And Deb's frustrated. Deb has been working there for so long. If Deb left there tomorrow, I don't know what their company would do. I think their company would go under because of how integral she is. But there is this whole thing about arguing for being paid what you're worth, but also company in the whole thing of what we're saying about you're making a steady income, you're gainfully employed in a economy that is very shaky right now. So I think that's it. I think we're getting to a point where a lot of, like, just again listening to like Amazon workers, the Starbucks workers, a lot of folks that are really fed up. I think there's things that people do at the top that it's not necessarily malicious. It's almost like Hanlon's razor. Don't assume malevolent intent when incompetence can be explained. And I don't think it's incompetence so much as when you're that far up at the top, you're not
connected.
Yeah, exactly. You're not connected. And so if you're the CEO of your company, probably doesn't even really understand the guy that your situation so much unless it lands on his desk. And
even my senior director, I'm not bullshitting you, bullshitter, used to bump into me all the time in the village on a powder day, which means we got, probably like 8 or more inches, right? And they'd say, "Hey, did you get a chance to go out on the mountain today?" And I would just look at them like, "No." And one of the things I was in charge of was plowing.
Yeah.
Clearing walkways.
Yep.
And I was like, no, I would have loved to, but my day has been really busy. Like, how do you not even have a clue and you're asking me questions like that?
Couldn't squeeze that into my schedule.
Yeah. I'm happy I got a chance to go to the bathroom today. Like,
right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Like it's teaching. We have this thing called jeans passes. What that is like you can earn the right to wear jeans one day as a teacher. And it's like you, instead of just wearing whatever and we all wear professional, looks, but you can wear jeans and a regular shirt. And this thing is treated like it's like held over teachers like it's this golden ticket, like, and what happens is, like, you'll say, "All right, great job on being the first to finish your training. Great job. Your students scored the highest on their test scores, and you were able to have all these kids grow in their reading scores. Here's your jeans pass." And you're kind of like, "Great, thank you. I would have much rather. I would have taken a $20 Starbucks card over jeans pass." And it's almost,
that's what a good manager is. A good manager is going to know what motivates every single person on that team. And for me, if you're 19, 20 and you're coming out to work for me, you're probably motivated by, do you want the afternoon off to go snowboard?
Yes.
So getting to know versus, if you're someone who's in their 40s who works for me, you're probably, and you've got a family, you're probably pretty motivated by, how about I put a bonus in that paycheck for you? You know, so getting to know what motivates your team can make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
And knowing them on that individual level and not having a generic corporate blanket for your attaboys cover everything. But
yeah, it's kind of, and that goes back to also the blanket $20 minimum. It's like, yeah, if you're in this market, that's you're living the high life. But if you're in Colorado, you're still that's barely scraping by. Leadership is so important. And where do we go? Where do you see us going from here in the workplace environment? How do we solve any pay gap, whether it's gender, whether it's whatever it is? Where do you see us kind of heading as a as the economy?
So for Colorado, and for me, I was after I left the company, I found myself really angry. I would listen to Rage Against the Machine as I drove 20 miles down Valley to go to my other job. And I would scream it like in my car, windows rolled up, get to work, all
And
nice.
they do what they told you.
Yeah.
Do what they told you.
Scream it the whole way home, angry. And my husband would be like, "What is happening to you?" And I had to see someone. I had to go talk to someone because I would just go from angry to tears. And for me, I looked at what we were doing as a state, and I was like, how can I influence this? And I started working with the Women's Foundation of Colorado. And in our state, we passed legislation now if you post a job on, whether it's internal in your company or in the newspaper or websites, whatever, you have to put the hiring range. So you have to put, for this starting teacher, the pay range is from this to this. So that way going into it, everyone knows what that is. And I feel like a lot of girls are less hesitant to negotiate. I walk into a job and, if that wage range says it's from 50 to 75,000 starting, and I don't know that, and I walk into a job and you offer me 50,000 and I have 20 years of teaching history, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Versus if I walk into that job and I know the wage range is 50 to 75,000 and I have 20 years of teaching history, I can say, you know what? I've got a lot of history. I should not be starting at the bottom of this range. Why don't we move it up to maybe 60, 65 and we can talk. So it gives the person applying for a position, regardless of their identity, a little bit of knowledge going into it. And then the other things we've done within the state of Colorado, specifically to address the gender pay gap, is the main reason females stay for so long in their positions is because children are relying on them. So instead of being able to ask for 2 years of back pay, 6 years of back pay is a little bit more daunting for a corporation.
Yeah.
So there's that financial incentives to hold Colorado accountable, or to hold corporations accountable. And then another piece of that is with the legislation that we recently passed, a company has to disclose. So if I am hiring for a position and I need prerequisites of ABC, and 2 of my candidates only have A and B, but the third one has A, B, and C, I have to disclose who I hired and that they met these qualifications, and these 2 didn't, which basically is supposed to stop the golfing buddy scenario or hey, my kid needs an entry-level position. Why don't you hire him on here? It makes it so it's transparent, whether you're with the company or not. You can say, hey, I'd like to ask you who did get hired and what were their qualifications. So that now has to be disclosed. As well as we also gave the power to the state of Colorado to investigate claims of discrimination. So currently, most states use the EEOC, which is a federal organization. And the EEOC has had some funding issues for a very long time. And for me, I filed my charge with the EEOC over a year ago, and it is still with the EEOC. So if you've dealt with anything with the federal government, nothing about it is very rapid.
Yeah. Hurry up and wait,
Yes, exactly. So by giving the power to the state of Colorado, it makes these claims investigated a little bit faster. And for a lot of people, they can't afford to sit and wait for the EEOC to do their job.
Yeah.
Lots of times they're like, oh my gosh, this is such a horrible process, or this is so daunting, that they walk away from it. And that is really what every large corporation wants to happen, because they can afford to wait it out. The average housekeeper is going to struggle to fill out even the online filing of a charge. So that alone is going to be daunting.
And you mentioned a lot of households like English is a second language, so just filling out that paper, and it's not like they have an HR to go to.
No. And I mean, I think the other piece that, everyone should always keep in mind everywhere, HR is not at a company to help you. HR is at a company to protect the company. They're not there looking out for your best interest. They're there looking out for the company's best interest.
You're absolutely right.
Hopefully that is, keeping bad management in check, but that doesn't always happen.
That's true.
And so for me, I channeled a lot of my frustration into, I testified at the Senate in Colorado. I testified at the House. I became very active in how can I hold this corporation accountable, because this was really wrong. And these changes won't benefit me because my situation is prior to making these changes, but it will it will make it better for those who come after me, which is pretty cool.
And that's cool, and that's what we need. And it's sad that it has to come to this kind of pushback, but it's I think we're fighting a mentality that I felt was prevalent in the early 2000s. When movies like you had Glenn Ross, you had Boiler Room, The Apprentice was popular. There seemed to have been a mentality of, not just to always be closing, but kind of like a kind of along the lines of did this just lock up on me?
I hear you. You're good.
Okay. Now that's just like all of a sudden the thing just locking up. Whatever. Like there's maybe it's maybe the corporations are coming for us. I feel like sometimes though we're fighting against also a mentality. We've made so much growth, but there's always this mentality of make is like instant gratification, but in a corporate sense, like it make as much money, makes as much profit for this quarter as possible, and not really focusing on long-term growth of a company. There seemed to be this like almost like a scam mentality where we could where it's like how can it, like a reluctance to want to pay anybody what they're worth. And to me it just seems like, and I don't know if you see this, but I feel like we're now starting to get into a position where a lot more people are speaking up. I want to say I was trying to remember the guy's name, but the guy that was heading up the Amazon strike, they wrote him off as somebody that was just some like gangster thug guy that wasn't going to be very well spoken. And to their surprise, he was a great leader, and he rallied a whole bunch of Amazon workers. And I feel like we're getting to a point where workers' rights and being able to have that work-life balance we're getting there, but it's going to be things might get worse before they get better. Do you kind of see that? Are we heading in the right direction, or do you think things are going to be rougher?
I mean, I always think if you're the CFO, your job is to make, and you're a large corporation, your job is to make sure that stock goes up, right? So, that is always going to be your job. That is always going to be on the back of your mind. But on the other piece of that, money is part of it. But I also think people don't want to feel disposable, especially when you've been with a company for, more than a minute. People don't want to feel like they are a number. They want to feel heard. They want to feel that the company recognizes the value that they're bringing. And, I think in every occupation, there's something that's industry knowledge. And when you've worked as a teacher or you've worked for a corporation for a very long time, there's knowledge that I can't teach you. It's knowledge that you have from your years of service in that industry.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think that has a pretty high value in corporations and in every occupation. And if the leaders of these occupations, they need to recognize that, because then all of a sudden they get this turnover and they're losing that sort of industry knowledge. And that's a shame. That's why we lose great teachers like yourself who, they don't want to be part of that corporation anymore.
All right, we're going to take a quick break from solving all of the world's problems to tell you about a good friend of mine and a service she's offering. Are you tired of feeling like your dream financial future is out of reach? Are you struggling with overwhelming debt, trying to pay off your home early, or simply wanting to give more? Well, my good friend Vanessa Rudder Jackson is here to help. An educator and military veteran, Vanessa is here to guide you through the confusion and make your dream financial future a reality. With her certified financial coaching services, she'll help you create a personalized plan that sets you up to win with money. As an educator and a mother of two, Vanessa understands the challenges of scraping by and stretching paychecks. She's been there, and she knows how to navigate the financial landscape to help you thrive. Don't let financial stress hold you back any longer. Take the first step towards financial freedom today with Rudder Jackson Financial Coaching. Reach out to Vanessa today for a free 45-minute consultation at varudder34@gmail.com or go to tinyurl.com/RJMoneyCoach. That's varudder34@gmail.com or tinyurl.com/RJMoneyCoach. Remember, it's never too late to take control of your finances and achieve your dreams. Start your journey to financial freedom with Rudder Jackson Financial Coaching today. All right, now let's get back to solving the world's problems with the most charming host on the interwebs. One of the things I want to circle back on is having clear, transparent, promotional wages, where, hey, this is the path, and having that clear. Is that something because a lot of times people in the past, it's don't ever how dare you ask me how much I'm making? But I almost feel like if there was a clear, open pathway of, hey, this is, if you achieve this level in this company, this is what you're making, and everybody's kind of making the same, where the promotions are based on merit. Is that something that's feasible, or does that punish the harder workers that are at the same level as those that are just sitting there collecting money?
No, again, part of the legislation that we worked on in Colorado is to provide those clear pathways. So for myself, as we talked about earlier, I was given hoop after hoop. And regardless of clearing them, it was, sorry, we were just sort of making that up. And
you didn't think you'd jump through the hoop.
Exactly. And so by showing those clear pathways, you can say, for example, if I break this down to a line level group of employees, you can base it on time. Hey, you can't move up to the next level until you've been here for at least a year, 2 years, whatever you want to space that. You can base it on knowledge and say, hey, I can't promote you until you get your CDL driver's license. You can make concrete steps for people that are tiered for being able to grow within an organization. And I think that's going to be huge. And when you have two people or even more going out for the same position, right? Having that transparency of why one person was taken over another is huge, and it's going to hold companies accountable. Now, if in Colorado, if you're, I don't even know the stages of teachers, but if you're a great teacher and I just want to give you a promotion for being a great teacher, it's not a
Yeah.
new job. It's, hey, we're going to move you up to a senior teacher because you're doing
Yeah.
such a good job. That's a little different. I don't have to post that. I don't have to necessarily interview other people. I'm promoting you for doing a great job. But if I have an opening, that's something that, like, say a manager leaves and you've got 2 line level people who started at the same time. It makes it more so you can't pick one person because they're your buddy. You got to pick the
Yeah.
person who's going to be best suited for the position.
Now, there may be cases where the person best suited for that position is your buddy.
Sure.
But if you have the data, you have like if they have the qualifications and to back it up, there shouldn't be an issue. You know, it's like we should get to a point where we're so like you were saying, so transparent where, like, I promoted Phyllis instead of Michael, and because look at this is where Phyllis's performance has been. She's been with the company X amount of years. She's got this licensure. She's got this, and this is where she's getting the promotion. And it's like, and I almost feel like that is how do we combat that stigma now if we do implement this stuff? Do you feel like it's just going to something that's going to take time, or are people going to still be kind of questioning every promotion or worried about their pay, even if we have these things in place?
I mean, I definitely think it's a change in mindset. For example, when Colorado started posting hiring ranges, they also made it illegal, because we used to have, that same director I had used to be like, no one can talk about their wages at work. Well, that was made illegal in Colorado, because I think also, especially when you're talking about wage gap issues, how do I know I'm making less or more than the person that I've sat beside and worked with for the past 20 years if we're not allowed to talk about it, right? It makes it very hard to figure out. So Colorado said, hey, you can't say that anymore. And employees, let's get real. Employees are going to totally talk about it. So, why put something on that where they're now afraid they're going to get in trouble? Like, again, the goal of being a good leader is not to lead by fear, but to lead by example or leadership, and I had those conversations. There were some adjustments made while I was still at the company that were made in one group and not another. And I said something to my director, and I'm like, how do I handle this? This needs to be fixed. And he goes, well, why are they talking about it? They can't do that. And I was like, yeah, they can do that now. Like that. Sorry, but that's legal. We can't tell them that.
And even if it wasn't legal, guess what? They're going to talk about it. They're going to go. They're going to go to the bar. They're going to have a couple drinks and like, what's going on here? That kind of like strong arm censorship is silly.
I think the other thing too is if I don't get a job, if I don't get the promotion and someone else does, and then you sit down with me as my manager and say, hey, I hired Aaron because he's been doing podcasts for a really long time and you've never done one. And, we really want to grow this as to something the company's doing, right? I can be like, oh, is this something that I should be learning? Is this something, you know what I mean? It can give that other person who didn't get the promotion, what do I have to do to get that promotion next time?
And not just some fake hoop to jump through, but an actual, like, and that comes back to leadership versus, leadership out of compassion versus leadership out of fear, like you were talking about before. When you lead with fear, you're only going to get people to do the job as much. I mean, you're going to have people that are doing the job because for the love of the job, but you're not going to get people to really want to work for you. They're just going to want to avoid your wrath. But if you work for somebody that clearly shows compassion and is genuine, not bullshitting you, but somebody that's clearly, showing compassion when they interact with you, a good leader would do that. A good leader would promote Phyllis and then go talk to Michael and sit down with Michael and say, hey, buddy, this is what we're going with Phyllis. Here's why. here's some things, like here's some things that I'd like for, if you can knock out these things, this is what we're doing, or something like that. But having that conversation and being genuine, I feel like that's good leadership. And sometimes I don't know if that's something that can be taught. It's almost like someone's got to almost be an intrinsic leader to want to do that.
A little bit. I think a big part of it is getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have uncomfortable conversations. I mean, I'm an inherently friendly, nice person. My glass is pretty much always half full,
Mm-hmm.
and I hated having to fire people. I
Yeah.
hated having to let people go. And coaching, certain things could be really difficult. I had someone who did a great job day to day, but his personality was a little bit snappy, and he didn't quite even know that his personality was snappy. And to have that conversation and say, hey, your team members, they don't want to work with you. That's hard to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more you become comfortable being uncomfortable, and whether it's in those discussions of asking, how can I grow? How can I get paid more? How can I coach you better? Because if I don't have this conversation with you, I'm going to quietly keep you in the same spot and not promote you. And that's
Yeah.
not going to make you happy either. And again, for myself, learning new things, that's not comfortable. You got to get out of your comfort zone. Like,
Yep.
it's like taking someone who's an Apple user and making them become an Android user. They're
Or
not going to be comfortable, but like
yeah.
sometimes you got to mix it up a little bit to get there,
Yeah. It's like with the pandemic, we had all these teachers that they've been using physical tests and printing
Mm-hmm.
stuff off the printer. Now they had to take their entire teaching curriculum and figure out how to put it virtual, how to put it online, how to get the kid, and how to teach online. For someone like me, that was like a fish to water, but for so many teachers that aren't very comfortable with technology, it was a nightmare. And
Yeah.
it was really tough for them to adjust. Plus I maybe you're kind of thinking what you're saying. Do you think there's room to maybe for training managers and training leaders how to have those difficult conversations? I go back to the movie Moneyball, where Jonah Hill's character has to tell the baseball guy he's traded, and he's more nervous than the baseball guy. He's like
Mm-hmm.
gonna throw up in the trash bucket, and he goes in and he just says he's traded. The guy goes, all right, and he just walks out. Like, he walks out. It's almost like you're doing a disservice by not telling your employees the hard truth. I had to tell when I first got out of college, I was a Pizza Hut assistant manager, and I had to have a conversation with my employees about deodorant.
Oh
And
yeah, that's
it's,
another good one.
God, it's such a hard, because I was and now, of course, I'm a dumb kid. I'm barely 24. I'm trying to have this conversation and not be insulting, but it was like nobody could work with her. And it was one of those things where I brought in the shift manager to help, but and she appreciated the conversation, and she took care of it. But it was like I was miserable. I was nauseous. I couldn't eat. I was like, oh, I think it affected me more than her. She seemed fine. She was like, all right, and it was just, and she took care of it. But yeah,
And again, that
yeah,
that industry knowledge, when you've been working and doing stuff like that for 20 years,
mm-hmm.
you have a database in your mind that you can't teach someone how to have that conversation.
Yeah,
But if you had to have that conversation again down the line somewhere, you're going
yep,
to be much more capable of having it. And when we start to lose our middle management because they don't feel valued as an individual, they don't want to be just a number for a corporation. That corporation loses all of that knowledge, and
yeah.
it's not going to be as successful without it.
We're losing a lot of veteran teachers that way too, because there's some teachers, they don't want to become a principal. They don't want the promotion path. They just want to make money that's equivalent to their experience. But when they retire early or they quit because they don't feel supported, you're not just you can't replace them with a brand new teacher right out of college, or a teacher's assistant. You're losing so much experience.
Yeah.
And yes, granted, some of that is experience that may or may not have adapted to modern times, but you're losing such a.
You can teach someone tasks.
Yes.
You can teach someone how to come to work, do the tasks and everything else, but you can't teach them that knowledge, you know?
You can't. There's certain innate qualities that, like, teaching is a calling. There's a lot of things in jobs that are a calling. Just like going back to our baseball guy. I mean, there's a reason why Michael Jordan is the best is one of the greatest basketball players of all time. There's a reason why people consider Tom Brady or Serena Williams or a number of people and Tiger Woods. That these are all people that are among the top of their field. But that's because they have some natural abilities, but they also didn't just they didn't not train. They didn't not practice. And there were things like that, there were things that they had to learn to get to be that good. And in some case, and it kind of goes back to my friend that was dyslexic, but he was performing so well and everything else. If they never addressed his dyslexia, he would still just kind of be like this. But once we finally got him the supports he needed, it's like he's taking off. Who knows? He might buy Twitter X and YouTube and roll it into one company someday, or who knows? He might invent the pill that reverses our aging. Who knows? He might do something like that, or he might be the one that invents a podcast that never locks up and drops its feed.
Never know.
In the middle of a conversation. Well, Michelle, this has been awesome. I look forward to more conversations with you, maybe even off the air, just because I love having a new cousin. A cousin I've always had, but I just never really connected with. But and I'm sure we'll see each other at some point at some family gathering. Maybe Deb and I should come out to Colorado for a little bit.
Absolutely.
We're not much of a skier, but maybe I like to go sledding. I don't know.
There you go.
But we'll come hang out and. But this has been awesome. And so what's next? What advice do you have for specifically women in the workplace, but in general, like what advice do you have for women in the workplace who feel like they're not being valued or they're not being paid what they should comparatively?
So obviously not every state has the same rules. And like we were talking, you might not even know that you're not making the same as the person beside you. But if you have any doubt, any question about it, report it to the EEOC because, they might dismiss it. And at that point you're like, okay, well, it was dismissed. I guess there wasn't anything there, but maybe there is. The easiest way, in my opinion, to determine is tasks, right? Specific tasks. So if one person is calling themselves a journalist and one person is calling themselves a reporter and they're doing the exact same work and the same quality of work, and one is being paid much more than the other, then that's something that's a big question mark.
Yeah.
So I always tell girls, even if you don't know how much you're making, if you can look at that next level of employees above you and look at that and say, okay, these guys that I'm working with, I'm doing the exact same work, but I'm only an assistant manager. Why is that? And I would start with that conversation with your director or your HR. Because the goal is not necessarily to bring about cases. It's to ask the question of, hey, I've noticed this. Why is this happening? And in an ideal world, someone is going to say, hey, that's a mistake. We're going to look at this a little bit closer and we're going to correct that. Or, they could turn around and say, oh, this person recently went and got a certificate for, senior teaching skills or, whatever it might be. Right. So the biggest advice I can give anyone is have that conversation.
Yeah.
And start there. And if it continues, or if you do think that there is an issue of discrimination and your organization is not helping you with it, contact the EEOC. There's no charge to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing is going to happen fast. If you are still with the company, sometimes they can make it uncomfortable. That was why I left and filed a
Yeah.
charge. But filing charges are time sensitive. So if you have something happen and you wait years and then say, okay, I'm ready to do something about it, it's going to have expired by then.
Yeah.
So if you do feel that you have a legitimate case, file it.
Awesome. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on to follow up with what's going on. Great to finally have a cousin, and everybody out there. Communication's the key. I mean, you don't get anywhere not talking about these things. And I feel like ultimately, we can get a lot closer to solutions if we talk, but more importantly, if we listen. So, yep, good.
I like to say, I tell this to my husband all the time. Most growth comes from those places where you feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. That's disequilibrium, and that's something that we talk about in teaching. Teaching is not the absence of feeling. That teaching, you don't teach in a comfort zone. You learn by being that disequilibrium, that lack of comfort, and then how do you get back to that level? Like how do you balance yourself?
One final piece of advice too is that was a piece of advice for someone who felt that they were being discriminated against. Another piece of advice to my guy friends, because I've been asked this by a lot of people too, is if you've been working beside someone for the last 10 years and they do a great job, you can look at her and say, hey, I'm making this much. Are you there with me? Because we should be together because your work is outstanding. And a company, it is illegal to lower someone's pay to make it equal. So if you have that conversation, no one is going to be able to lower your pay and say, oh, well, we were paying you $10,000 too much. They can only bring the other person's pay up.
Yeah. So, and I think this kind of goes back to that boiler room talk where we're coming out of a mentality of cutthroat competition where so many people are lifting others with them. I'm a professional wrestling fan, and one of my favorite professional wrestlers is Thunder Rosa, and she's not just a wrestler, but she's involved in so many community outreach programs. But one of the things that she did for females in wrestling is they broke away from where women were just objects, but they're actually they're seen to do the same kind of flippy do, jumping off the top rope and all that kind of stuff, all this hardcore stuff that's whoa, I could never do. But when she made it in All Elite Wrestling, which is the kind of like the competitor to WWE, she then turned around and brought up so many of the girls that she worked with and got them spots and was in getting them the spotlight. And she was celebrating. She was like, yes, thank you. I thank you for signing me on this contract. Now, why don't you come look at these 6 ladies over here and see how cool they are? And I feel like we're hopefully as a society, we're getting to the point where we realize we're not fighting over scraps. We can all eat at the table. Does that make sense?
I love that.
We could all eat together rather than fighting for the scraps. And I hope this continues. I hope we get more situations where all boats rise in a tide or something like that. I don't know what that is, but let's all
high tide raises all boats.
There it is. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's all eat at the table together, and I think we can all share success.
I love it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and good luck with everything. No bullshit. This has been an awesome chat. I'm trying to break his record of how many times he said I'm not bullshitting you, but I don't know if I've broken that yet.
Probably not.
Michelle, do you have any social media spots people can follow you or chat with you, or do you don't want to deal with any of that mess?
No, I don't care. I've actually helped so many people out in similar situations since I've been here. You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram, and I can send you that info so you can post it.
I'll put it at the end here. Hey, if you are struggling, if you want to just ask some questions, reach out to Michelle. I know she'll give you the real honest answers, and she can definitely guide you to what's the next step. Also, I don't know, maybe at some point, if you need some skiing tips or how to, what is powdering versus, what's the best snow to ski in, whatever it is, just reach out to her, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for tuning in. On behalf of Michelle, this is Ron. Have a great one. And remember, you are worth it. You're not alone. And we're all humans just on this rock twirling around. Have a great one. Catch new episodes of Mental Health Mondays every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Start your week off with a smile and some inspiration.